This is the story of Piltover and Zaun, two cities that share one foundation, one river, and a history shaped by invention, wealth, division, and the cost of progress. I will follow that history from the ancient port that stood here long before either modern city existed, through the rise of the sun gates and hextech, and into the troubled age that changed both cities forever. Before I begin, one detail matters. The history of Piltover and Zaun has been told through champion biographies, regional records, short stories, games, and the events of Arcane. Riot has placed these stories within one shared Runeterra, but not every older account has yet been rewritten to fit every newer event. When an old record and a newer story disagree, I will follow the newer shared history where it is clear. Where the answer remains uncertain, I will leave it uncertain. That is more honest than pretending these two cities have a perfectly settled timeline, because their history is still being uncovered and, in some places, deliberately concealed. To understand Piltover and Zaun, I have to begin with geography. The cities stand at one of the most valuable crossings in Runeterra, close to the narrow land connection between the northern continent of Valoran and the great southern continent of Shurima. Trade moving between those lands naturally passes near this point. Sea traffic also approaches from two sides, which made the region useful long before its towers, laboratories, factories, and bridges appeared. The modern cities turn that location into power. Piltover rises around bright cliffs and monumental structures, watching over harbours and enormous sea gates through which ships carry goods from distant nations. Zaun occupies the deep valleys, fissures, and lower districts around it, where sunlight arrives weakened by height, architecture, and industrial haze. They appear to be opposites, but they are not two unrelated settlements that happen to grow beside each other. They are two results of the same place. Long before anyone used the name Piltover, an old port existed here. Later records connect it to Shurima and preserve a name usually rendered as Oshra Vazaun. Even that name comes with uncertainty, because much of what survives is part scholarship, part archaeology, and part inherited memory. The simplest version is also the most useful. An ancient community called Oshra Vazaun stood near these waters, and the shorter name Zaun endured after the older form faded. Its people depended upon the sea. Merchant vessels needed calm water and favourable winds, fishing boats needed safe journeys, and every household understood that weather could decide whether a voyage ended in profit or loss. From those needs grew devotion to a spirit of the wind. She became known as Janna, though the earliest forms of her name were not always spoken in exactly the same way. Janna's history tells us something important about the first Zaunites. Their civilization did not begin with hextech, chemtech, or the belief that science alone could master the world. It began with sailors asking the air to carry them home. Faith gathered around ordinary needs, and repeated belief gave the wind spirit a stronger presence. When ships returned safely, gratitude deepened. When storms threatened, more voices called to her. Over generations, the wind became part of the community's identity. Oshra Vazaun did not remain an isolated harbour. The Shuriman Empire expanded across much of the southern continent, drawing cities and peoples into its rule. The port entered that larger world of imperial roads, armies, trade, and religious authority. Shurima celebrated its emperor and the ascended warriors who served the empire, leaving less room for local gods who belonged to older customs. The people did not entirely abandon Janna. Public practice could change while private memory survived, and that appears to be what happened here. A sailor could honour imperial power and still whisper an old prayer before leaving shore. A family could obey the customs expected by rulers while keeping a bluebird symbol among its possessions. This quiet survival would matter later, because forgotten faith is not always the same as dead faith. Shurima eventually fell. Its imperial center was destroyed in a catastrophe tied to the failed ascension of its final emperor, and the order that had connected much of the continent broke apart. The collapse did not produce one clean ending. Territories separated, trade routes changed, old powers struggled for control, and surviving ascended warriors fought through the long period remembered as the Darkin Wars. For a port such as Zaun, survival meant adaptation. Empires can protect trade, but they can also make trade dependent upon their stability. When the empire vanished, merchants lost a familiar system and gained a more uncertain world. The city endured, and later tradition again associates Yana with protection during dangerous ages. Whether every survival can be assigned to one miraculous act is impossible to prove, but belief in her clearly remained woven into how Zaun understood its past. Centuries passed, and Runeterra faced further upheaval. The Rune Wars devastated large parts of the world as powers fought over magical forces that could erase cities and reshape land. Some societies responded by fearing magic. Others built new states around strength, control, or isolation. Zaun survived again, and its position became even more valuable when wider trade recovered. This survival was not passive. Ports live by reading change. Merchants learn which routes have become dangerous, which rulers can guarantee passage, which goods are scarce, and which nations are rebuilding. Craftspeople repair unfamiliar ships. Translators learn the languages of new customers. Dockworkers adapt to different cargoes. A city positioned between continents can turn instability elsewhere into opportunity, provided it avoids being destroyed by the same instability. By the time the settlement was commonly called Zaun, its merchant class had grown ambitious. The city already benefited from movement between north and south, but a barrier remained. Ships travelling between eastern and western seas could not simply pass through the isthmus. They faced longer routes around immense coastlines, and every extra day at sea added risk, expense, and delay. The idea that changed the region began as a commercial solution. If engineers could open a waterway through the land, ships could cross from one side to the other. Zaun would no longer be merely a useful port. It would control one of the most important maritime shortcuts in the known world. That promise carried almost every ingredient that later defined Piltover: technical confidence, private wealth, public ambition, and a willingness to place enormous consequences beneath the word progress. The plan was not foolish in its goal. Canals and gates can transform trade, connect distant markets, and enrich entire regions. The danger came from believing that the earth below the city had been fully understood. Work began upon the passage. Excavation reached into unstable ground while explosive force was used to break through the isthmus. The exact technical sequence is not preserved with perfect clarity across every account, but the outcome is certain. The operation triggered a geological disaster. Sections around the River Pilt collapsed. Water surged into districts that had suddenly dropped below the western sea level, while fissures opened through the earth. Buildings, roads, and neighborhoods were broken apart. Toxic gases and chemical substances escaped from below, changing the air of the lower city. Thousands were placed in danger, and many lives were lost. I do not need to turn this moment into a spectacle to explain its importance. A plan designed to shorten trade routes had torn through the community that financed it. The people who held the least control over the project carried much of its cost, and the physical shape of the disaster created the social shape of the cities that followed. As the waters rushed in, desperate people called upon the wind spirits their ancestors had worshipped, and Janna answered them. The oldest surviving version of this rescue describes air holding back the flood and clearing paths through the poisonous haze, giving residents time to reach safety. After centuries in which her worship had weakened, one shared emergency brought thousands of voices back to her. The rescue did not restore the old city. It preserved people, not streets. Whole areas remained sunken or shattered, and the fissures could not simply be closed. Families emerged with different losses. Some retained money, connections, and goods stored elsewhere. Others had little more than what they carried. In that uneven recovery, disaster hardened into class division. The wealthiest merchant families had resources to rebuild on safer, higher ground. New construction rose above the damaged districts and around the passage that the catastrophe had created. The lower areas remained inhabited by workers, survivors, mechanics, scavengers, traders, and families whose lives were tied to the old city. Over time, the name Piltover became associated with the prosperous upper city, while Zaun remained attached to the depths and to the older identity of the place. This is why the relationship cannot be reduced to rich neighbours and poor neighbours. Piltover grew from a disaster suffered by Zaun, and its prosperity depended upon the commercial opening produced by that same disaster. The upper city could celebrate the result as proof of progress. The lower city remembered the price. Engineers eventually completed the system of sea gates known as the sun gates. These structures allowed ships to pass between east and west, transforming the crossing into a controlled artery of world trade. Vessels that might once have spent far longer circling the southern continent could instead approach the gates, pay for passage, and continue toward distant markets. Every ship carried more than cargo. It carried fees, contracts, information, foreign visitors, and demand for local services. Warehouses expanded while brokers connected buyers with sellers, and shipyards repaired vessels damaged on long journeys. Inns, markets, banks, workshops, and transport systems grew around the flow. Piltover became wealthy not because every citizen invented a machine, but because the city sat astride movement itself. The anniversary of the Sun Gates' opening became Progress Day in Piltover. The holiday celebrated innovation, commercial achievement, and the belief that human ingenuity could solve immense problems. New inventions could be presented, houses could display their influence, and the city could tell itself a flattering story about how it had opened the world. Zaun remembered the date differently. For many below, the triumph could not be separated from the districts lost in the collapse, and from the people who never reached safety. One city's celebration became another city's memorial. Nothing explains the emotional distance between Piltover and Zaun more clearly than that shared date. They looked at the same gates and saw different histories. Piltover's powerful merchant clans gradually became the central political force of the upper city. Wealth, industry, and government overlapped because the families controlling trade also controlled the resources needed to shape policy. Their council did not grow from a broad democratic movement. It reflected the interests of houses whose fortunes were tied to commerce, invention, and the stability of the gates. Names such as Kiramman, Medada, Feros, and other influential houses became associated with particular forms of power. Some controlled workshops or resources. Some built political alliances. Some invested in research. Some managed estates and trade. Their rivalries could be fierce, yet they shared an interest in preserving Piltover as a secure place for business. Security developed around that need. Piltover's enforcers protected property, investigated crime, guarded important sites, and imposed the upper city's authority. In principle, law promised order. In practice, the experience of that law depended heavily upon where a person lived and which family stood behind them. For a wealthy Piltovan, an enforcer could represent safety. For a Zaunite worker crossing a bridge under suspicion, the same uniform could represent surveillance or force. The institution served two cities without being equally accountable to both. That imbalance would continue for generations, feeding resentment each time Piltover described its control as peace. Architecture made the hierarchy visible. Piltover favoured open air, pale stone, high windows, decorated bridges, academies, and towers that caught the sun. These were not merely aesthetic choices. Clean surfaces and spacious streets advertised stability to merchants and visitors. A foreign investor arriving through the gates saw a city that appeared orderly enough to protect a fortune. Zaun grew downward and inward. Iron, glass, pipes, platforms, old stone, and improvised additions formed dense neighbourhoods across different levels. The city was not one uniform slum. Its districts varied in wealth, danger, industry, and culture. Some commercial levels connected directly with Piltovan traffic, while the deepest areas, often called the sump, lived with the worst air and least protection. Large conveyors linked levels, including a famous lift known as the Rising Howl. Smaller elevators, bridges, stairways, and transport systems carried workers and goods through the vertical city. Height became an everyday measurement of privilege. Going upward could mean cleaner air, stronger light, and closer access to power. Going down could mean cheaper rooms, dangerous fumes, and communities that Piltover preferred not to see. Industrial growth intensified this divide. Piltover wanted manufactured goods and profitable research, while Zaun offered space for work that was noisy, dirty, experimental, or unsafe. Waste travelled downward more easily than wealth travelled upward. The result was the Zaun Grey, a poisonous haze formed by the city's industrial environment. The grey did not remain at the same strength every day. Airflow, weather, production, and local systems changed its density, yet its presence shaped Zaunite life. Filters, masks, vents, sealed rooms, and knowledge of safer routes became ordinary parts of survival. Respiratory illness and chemical exposure were not abstract concerns. They were built into the geography of inequality. Janna's followers continued to ask the wind for relief. Bluebird medallions and quiet acts of devotion survived among people who remembered that clean air could feel like a blessing. Her power rose and fell with belief, making her a fitting spirit for Zaun. She was strongest when people shared hope, but the city often encouraged isolation and desperation. Zaun also developed a fierce culture of practical invention. Shortages forced mechanics to repair what others discarded. Scrap changed hands until someone found a new use for it. Devices were rebuilt from mismatched parts. And experiments that would never receive approval in Piltover found willing buyers below. This creativity was not a lesser copy of Piltovan science. It followed different incentives. Piltover's academies could reward precision, theory, presentation, and patentable results. Zaun's workshops rewarded anything that functioned before the rent came due. An elegant machine and an ugly machine could solve the same problem, but only one might survive the sump. Chemtech emerged from Zaun's blend of alchemy, machinery, medicine, and industry. The category includes many substances and devices rather than one single invention. Chemical power could run equipment, alter bodies, produce weapons, support artificial organs, or keep an injured worker moving. Its accessibility made it valuable. Its instability made it dangerous. Piltover often treated chemtech as proof that Zaun lacked restraint, yet the upper city benefited from the products, labour, and knowledge produced below. Wealthy clients could purchase augmentations without living beside the waste. Merchants could condemn dangerous factories while collecting returns from them. Moral distance became another luxury. As industry expanded, local bosses gained control over factories, neighbourhoods, supply chains, and armed crews. These figures became known as chem-barons. Their authority did not come from one unified Zaunite government. It came from ownership, fear, employment, favours, and the ability to provide what formal institutions did not. A chem-baron could exploit workers and still be the person who kept a district supplied. Another could fund clinics while ensuring those clinics depended upon a private chemical product. Loyalty in Zaun was rarely simple. When public systems fail, private power can look like rescue from one angle and captivity from another. The barons formed shifting arrangements with one another because constant open conflict would damage business. Cooperation did not create equality, and no stable alliance erased rivalry. Territories changed, debts accumulated, and every new discovery threatened to upset the balance. Zaun became politically fragmented even while Piltover preferred to deal with it as one troublesome undercity. Between the council above and the barons below lived most of the population. Dockhands, couriers, miners, inventors, shopkeepers, performers, smugglers, healers, clerks, apprentices and factory workers moved through the same streets without sharing the same loyalties. Their history is harder to trace than the lives of famous champions, because ordinary people leave fewer official records. Still, they created the cities far more completely than any councillor did. They also created a mixed culture along the middle levels. Piltover and Zaun could not remain socially sealed, no matter how strongly their leaders emphasized difference. Goods moved between them. Families had relatives on both sides. Workers traveled upward. Piltovans sought entertainment and forbidden products below. Zaunites sold skills that the upper city needed but refused to respect. Accents, clothing, food, music, tools, and slang crossed the divide. A device invented in a sump workshop might be refined in a Piltovan laboratory. A fashionable upper city style could return below as parody. People learned to read one another's status from posture, shoes, breathing masks, and the way they spoke about the river. This constant exchange is why the twin cities remain one civilization even when their governments, economies, and identities pull apart. Piltover cannot remove Zaun without removing the labour and history beneath its own success. Zaun cannot ignore Piltover because the gates, markets, and laws above shape daily life below. For a long time, trade was the greatest engine of Piltovan influence. Then a new form of technology gave the city an even grander identity. Magic, once feared for its role in ancient wars, was drawn into machinery. The name for that union would become famous across Runeterra, hextech. The history of hextech is one of the places where older records and the arcane account do not fit neatly together. Earlier biographies tied major developments to rare crystals, powerful merchant clans, and inventors whose discoveries unfolded across different periods. The current shared story places Jace, Talis, and Victor at the center of the breakthrough that allowed controlled magical technology to enter public life. Both versions agree on the point that matters most for the cities. Hextech turned magic into an industry. Jace came from a Piltovan family connected to the manufacture of tools. His name did not begin with the same political weight as the oldest great houses, and his ambitions reached beyond the products that had supported his family. He believed magic could be studied, stabilized, and placed within devices useful to ordinary people. That idea challenged fear created by the Rune Wars. Heimerdinger, the Yordle scholar who had witnessed more history than his human colleagues, understood magical catastrophe as memory rather than legend. His caution did not come from ignorance. It came from having seen what confident mortals could unleash. Jace approached the problem from the opposite direction. If uncontrolled magic was dangerous, then knowledge could make it safer. If a power existed, someone would eventually use it, which meant careful discovery might be better than permanent prohibition. That argument has followed new technology through every age of Piltover. Victor came from Zaun. His childhood and early work exposed him to industrial danger, weak safety systems, and the physical cost imposed upon workers. Where Jace imagined what magic might make possible, Victor understood what existing machines were already doing to people below. Their partnership joined two forms of intelligence. Jace brought access, confidence, and a Piltovan belief in grand solutions. Victor brought precision, persistence, and experience shaped by Zaun's practical problems. Together, they found a way to direct magical energy through engineered systems. The discovery could have ended in punishment. Unauthorized research threatened both law and academic convention, and powerful people had reasons to fear it. Yet Piltover's leaders also recognized opportunity. A city built upon controlling trade understood the value of controlling a new technology before anyone else. Hextech became both scientific achievement and political asset. Its early demonstrations promised faster transportation, improved tools, new forms of medicine, stronger infrastructure, and devices that could perform work beyond ordinary mechanics. Investors saw markets. Councillors saw influence. The public saw proof that the City of Progress deserved its name. The Hex Gates extended that promise outward. By using hextech to move ships and cargo across enormous distances, Piltover could strengthen its role as a global hub. The old Sun Gates had shortened sea travel through geography. The Hex Gates shortened movement through magic and machinery. This was more than another invention. It threatened to rearrange trade itself. Nations and merchants that relied upon Piltover gained reason to protect their relationship with the city. Wealth arrived faster, and every successful journey made the technology appear safer, more necessary, and more permanent. The benefits did not spread evenly. Piltover presented hextech as a future for everyone, but access remained shaped by wealth and politics. The laboratories stood above. The patents and workshops belonged to those with council approval. Zaunites contributed knowledge and labor while receiving fewer of the cleanest rewards. Victor recognized the imbalance. His interest in technology was tied to reducing suffering, particularly the harm caused by dangerous conditions and failing bodies. Yet once discovery entered politics, the original purpose competed with military fear, commercial demand, and the prestige of the people whose names appeared on it. Jace also learned that invention does not remain in the inventor's hands. A device enters supply chains, laws, and institutions. A tool designed for industry can become a weapon. A transportation system can become pressure over foreign powers. A public symbol can hide private compromises. Piltover embraced the image of rational progress, but hextech contained mystery from the beginning. Magical energy did not become ordinary merely because it passed through metal. The crystals and forces involved carried properties that science had not fully explained, and later events showed that the boundary between mechanism, living systems, and the arcane was far less stable than the Council wished to believe. Heimerdinger's fears seemed excessive to people who had not lived through magical ruin. That difference in lifespan shaped the debate. Humans measured danger against careers, elections, illnesses, and a few decades of life. A Yordle who had watched civilizations rise and fall measured it against centuries. No one stood entirely on the side of wisdom. Caution could preserve injustice by delaying tools that Zaun desperately needed. Ambition could solve real problems while creating dangers beyond its control. The story of hextech works because every position contains part of the truth. As the technology spread, Piltover's self-image changed. It was no longer simply the city at the gates. It became the place where the impossible could be engineered. Academies attracted talent, Investors searched for the next breakthrough, and social status became connected to invention as well as ancestry. That culture created opportunity for people who could impress the right patrons. It also encouraged performance. A successful Piltover inventor needed more than a working machine. The device had to be presented, approved, financed, manufactured, and protected from competitors. Science moved through salons and council chambers as surely as it moved through laboratories. Below, Zaun continued developing its own answers. Chemtech could be produced without waiting for Piltover institutions, and its makers had no reason to accept the upper city's claim that only approved technology counted as progress. The two systems became symbols, even though the real boundary between them was not always clean. Hextech represented controlled magic, polished design, and institutional legitimacy. Chemtech represented chemical power, improvisation, bodily change, and survival outside those institutions. Piltover called one refined and the other reckless. Zaunites could answer that refinement was simply danger hidden behind expensive walls. The divide grew sharper as both cities armed themselves. Enforcers received improved equipment. Zaunite gangs and barons developed stronger chemicals and augmentations. Each side used the other's preparations to justify its own. Security became an argument that could never finish, because every defensive measure looked offensive from across the river. At the same time, a younger generation grew up inside the consequences. Children in Piltover learned that invention had made their city admired. Children in Zaun learned which pipes were hot, which alleys belonged to which crews, and how to recognize the first signs of bad air. Both groups were taught a history, but not the same one. The next turning point would not begin with one invention. It would begin with families and communities under pressure, with leaders trying to control a city they did not fully understand, and with young people inheriting conflicts they did not create. Zaun's demand for dignity did not begin with Silco, Vander, or any one modern leader. It had existed in quieter forms for as long as Piltover treated the undercity as a district to control rather than a people to represent. Workers protested conditions. Smugglers avoided taxes that returned little to their neighborhoods. Local leaders negotiated with enforcers because no equal council existed below. Every compromise reduced pressure for a time without correcting the structure that created it. The movement that brought Vander and Silco together grew from that history. Both men understood that Piltover's comfort depended upon Zaun accepting less. They shared a desire for the undercity to stand on its own, but agreement about the destination did not mean agreement about the road. Silco believed independence required Piltover to fear what refusal would cost. To him, the upper city had ignored suffering because ignoring it remained easy. Zaun needed unity, discipline, and enough power to make dismissal impossible. His vision was national as much as personal. He wanted the lanes and factories below to become a recognized nation rather than a collection of districts governed from above. Vander learned to distrust a victory purchased through endless escalation. Resistance had consequences for families who could not retreat to protected rooms. When conflict with Piltover reached the bridge, the people closest to him paid the price. That experience changed his priorities. He still cared about Zaun, but he came to believe that preserving lives required an imperfect peace. The difference broke their partnership. Their separation was personal, yet it also represented an argument that would divide Zaun repeatedly. One side asked how long people should tolerate injustice to avoid bloodshed. The other asked what freedom meant if the methods used to obtain it destroyed the community meant to be freed. Vander became a stabilizing figure in the lanes. He ran the last drop, listened to disputes, and maintained relationships strong enough to discourage reckless conflict. His authority did not rest on a council seat. It rested on reputation and on the belief that he would accept burdens for the people around him. That arrangement produced a fragile peace with Piltover's enforcers. Grayson, an experienced officer, understood that constant raids could turn every grievance into rebellion. Vander understood that open attacks would bring Piltover's full power down upon neighborhoods with little protection. Their cooperation was not friendship between equal governments. It was a practical channel between two people trying to prevent the worst outcome. Benzo and other local figures helped sustain that community. Shops doubled as gathering places, information moved through trusted relationships, and children learned that survival depended upon knowing whom they could rely on. Zaun's institutions often looked informal from above, but informal did not mean unimportant. Trust performed work that laws failed to do. Among the children shaped by this world were the sisters Vi and Powder. They lost their parents during conflict between the cities and were taken in by Vander, who raised them with Milo and Clagger. Their household was assembled from loss, yet it became a real family. Vi grew into responsibility early. She was forceful, protective, and willing to challenge anyone who threatened those she considered hers. Powder was younger, imaginative, and talented with mechanisms, but she struggled beneath the fear of disappointing the others. Each sister loved the other, and each carried expectations that made that love harder to express. Their small group survived through theft, salvage, and the skills common to children who knew the city better than adults expected. A journey into Piltover brought them into contact with materials tied to Jace's forbidden magical research. The resulting incident drew enforcer attention toward the undercity and threatened Vander's careful arrangement. That single act exposed how unequal law had become. Damage in Piltover demanded an immediate response below, even before officers understood who was responsible. Collective pressure could be placed upon an entire neighborhood because the council regarded Zaun as a source of danger rather than a population with rights. Vander tried to contain the crisis. He knew that surrendering children to Piltover would betray the people who trusted him. But refusing every demand risked a larger crackdown. Leadership in the undercity often meant choosing among harms created elsewhere. Silco saw opportunity in the same crisis. While Vander had built peace, Silco had built capacity. He developed alliances, recruited followers, and worked with Singed, a scientist whose experiments crossed boundaries that Piltover's respectable institutions rejected. Singed began his life in Piltover and possessed exceptional knowledge of chemistry, biology, and transformation. His pursuit of discovery separated knowledge from ordinary moral limits. He judged an experiment by what it revealed or achieved, not simply by the suffering it might create. Zaun offered the secrecy, materials, and desperate subjects that allowed such research to continue. From this work came Shimmer, a powerful substance capable of altering strength, endurance, healing, and physical form. Its exact effects depended upon preparation and use, which made it more than a single simple drug. Shimmer could support medicine, fuel machinery, create dependence, or turn a person into a weapon. Silco understood its political value. Piltover possessed wealth, organized enforcers, and the authority of law. Zaun could not answer those advantages with speeches alone. Shimmer offered money and power that did not require permission from above. The price was built into the strategy. Producing and distributing Shimmer expanded Silco's influence, but it also spread dependence and gave him control over vulnerable people. A substance presented as a means of liberation could make neighborhoods dependent upon the leader promising to free them. This contradiction did not make Silco's desire for independence false. It made his rule more dangerous. He could correctly identify Piltover's oppression while repeating its logic in another form, treating people as resources for a future decided by someone more powerful. Vander became the obstacle between Silco and control of the lanes. Their old disagreement returned with greater force, and the crisis ended the peace Vander had tried to maintain. His family was scattered, several people close to the sisters were lost, and the bond between Vi and Powder broke under grief and misunderstanding. The event changed both girls. Vi was removed from the undercity and held for years without the ordinary process that a Piltovan citizen might expect. Powder remained behind and was taken in by Silco, who recognized her pain, her talent, and the need to belong. Powder grew into Jinx. The change was not a simple erasure of the child she had been. Her creativity remained, as did her longing for connection. But both developed inside fear, guilt, and Silco's world of conflict. She became a brilliant builder of weapons and devices, unpredictable to enemies, and difficult even for allies to control. Silco treated Jinx as more than a tool. Their bond carried genuine attachment, which complicated every political calculation around her. He encouraged the identity that allowed her to survive, while also placing her abilities inside his struggle against Piltover. Under his influence, Zaun's economy changed. Shimmer factories expanded, loyalists replaced rival authorities, and the old balance among local leaders shifted. Some residents saw Silco as the first person in years who could make Piltover negotiate. Others experienced his movement through exploitation, addiction, and fear. The last drop changed with the city. Once a center of Vander's restrained authority, it became connected to Silco's rule. The transformation showed how power rewrites public memory. A place can remain physically familiar while everything it represents turns in another direction. Piltover spent these years enjoying the gains of hextech. The city saw new wealth and prestige, while many councillors remained only dimly aware of how Silco was consolidating power. That ignorance was not accidental. Piltover preferred a quiet undercity to an understood undercity, and information that threatened profitable normality could be dismissed until it became impossible to ignore. Caitlin Karaman grew up within one of Piltover's leading houses. Her family gave her protection, education, and access, but she developed an investigator's discomfort with easy explanations. Piltover's order looked less complete whenever she examined the details. Joining the enforcers placed her inside an institution shaped by class. Her family name opened doors while also creating expectations about what kind of danger she should avoid. Caitlin wanted to solve crimes through evidence rather than accept assumptions convenient to powerful people, and that instinct led her toward the hidden relationship between Shimmer, the Undercity, and Piltovan corruption. Vi's release brought the two women together. Their partnership crossed a social boundary that neither city believed could be crossed easily. Vi knew Zaun's roots, habits, and unspoken rules. Caitlin had access to Piltover's records and authority. Each saw the other's home through a perspective that challenged what she had been taught. Their differences did not vanish. Vi had years of reason to distrust enforcers, while Caitlin still believed law could be repaired and used for justice. What changed was their willingness to treat each other as individuals rather than symbols. In the history of the cities, that sounds small. In practice, institutions change only when enough people refuse the categories those institutions depend upon. Echo followed another path. As a child of Zaun with a rare understanding of machines, he could have become an inventor serving a baron or a weapon designer in Silco's organization. Instead, he helped build a community outside that control. The Firelights gathered people harmed or displaced by Shimmer and created a protected home around a living tree. Their refuge offered clean air, mutual care, and a future not defined entirely by Piltover or Silco. Echo's leadership differed from both Vander's compromise and Silco's centralized movement. He built independence in daily life before any treaty recognized it. the tree mattered as more than scenery. Zaun was often described through metal, smoke, and chemical light. So a healthy living space carried political meaning. It proved that the undercity's people did not naturally belong to pollution. The conditions around them were made by systems, and different systems could produce different lives. Echo also represented Zaunite science at its most hopeful. His inventions used limited resources with astonishing creativity. Yet he measured success by what they allowed his community to protect. Intelligence did not require a Piltover Academy to become extraordinary. Heimerdinger eventually encountered that fact directly. Removed from the authority that had insulated him, he entered Zaun and saw both the suffering created beneath Piltover and the ingenuity that had flourished without its support. The experience challenged his long habit of treating time as an abundant resource. For an immortal or nearly ageless scholar, waiting can appear wise. For a child breathing poisoned air, delay is a decision with immediate cost. Heimerdinger's caution about magical disaster remained justified, but Zaun taught him that caution can become neglect when it asks vulnerable people to wait indefinitely for relief. Jace's rise carried him from laboratory work into government. As the public face of hextech, he gained the influence to protect his research and direct its future. He also became responsible for choices far beyond engineering. Council politics rewarded compromise. Each house had investments, alliances, and secrets. A proposal could be scientifically sound and still fail because it threatened a trade arrangement. Another could be dangerous and still pass because several councillors expected profit. Mel Medada understood that world better than Jace did. Raised within a powerful Noxian family and shaped by her mother Ambessa's hard view of politics, Mel learned to influence people without always appearing to command them. In Piltover, she became a counsellor, patron, and strategist whose support helped Jace move through institutions that might otherwise have rejected him. Mel saw hextech's value as both invention and geopolitical power. Piltover's prosperity made it attractive to foreign interests, and technology capable of changing transportation could also change warfare. Remaining innocent of that fact would not keep the city safe. Ambessa arrived with a harsher conclusion. Power not converted into defense could be taken by someone willing to use force. Her interest in hextech reflected Noxian thinking, but it also reflected personal threats surrounding her family. To Jace and Piltover, she offered protection and experience. Beneath that offer rested the expectation that new weapons would follow. Victor's health declined while hextech's fame expanded. His work had helped create the city's future, yet his own body showed the human limits that future had not solved. The pressure drove him toward deeper experiments with a developing magical system known as the Hexcore. The Hexcore appeared able to learn and adapt. It blurred invention with something organic, responding in ways that could not be reduced to ordinary machinery. Victor believed it might transform damaged bodies and move humanity beyond suffering. He also learned that transformation could demand a price no equation had predicted. This marked a division between Victor and Jace. They had begun as partners trying to make magic useful, but their experiences pulled them toward different fears. Jace feared losing political control of hextech. Victor feared that caution would let people continue suffering when a solution might exist. Neither man fully understood the force they had opened. The arcane was not a neutral battery. Patterns, anomalies, and consequences emerged around it, suggesting that reality itself could react to repeated manipulation. Piltover had built its modern identity around control before proving that control was real. Meanwhile, Shimmer and Hextech approached one another through conflict. Jinx's attacks made Piltover confront technology from below, while the council debated how to answer. Enforcers increased pressure. Silco prepared for war and negotiation at the same time. The upper city repeatedly made the mistake of treating Zaun's anger as the creation of one criminal. Silco had intensified and directed that anger, but he had not invented the conditions behind it. Removing him without changing those conditions could alter leadership while preserving the conflict. Silco understood the opposite mistake. He treated a unified nation of Zaun as if naming it could erase deep divisions among barons, workers, firelights, addicts, merchants, and families. Independence could remove Piltover rule without automatically creating fair rule below. Jace entered Zaun with limited understanding of what a military solution would mean. Superior weapons could win a confrontation and still fail politically. Once he witnessed the human cost of escalation, he looked for a negotiated settlement. The possibility of Zaunite independence moved from forbidden idea to council-level proposal. Silco had succeeded in making Piltover consider what generations of suffering had not achieved. Yet the proposed peace depended upon surrendering Jinx, and that demand placed his public cause against his private bond. For Silco, the choice revealed a contradiction at the heart of leadership. He had treated sacrifice as necessary when other people paid it. When the requested sacrifice became the person he considered his daughter, necessity no longer sounded simple. Events moved faster than negotiation. Jinx stood between identities attached to different families and different visions of her future. Vi wanted to recover the sister she remembered. Silco defended the person Jinx had become, even when that person threatened everything he had built. The resulting crisis ended Silco's life and sent a hextech weapon toward Piltover's council, just as its members moved toward peace. That timing is central to the tragedy. Agreement became possible only after years of neglect had produced forces too unstable to wait for it. The attack did not merely damage a chamber. It shattered the belief that Piltover could keep Zaun's conflict below. Councillors and their families faced the danger that ordinary Zaunites had lived beside for years, and grief made retaliation appear immediate and reasonable. Caitlin suffered a personal loss and gained influence during the response. Her commitment to justice now competed with anger, fear, and the pressure to protect Piltover. The city that had once treated her as an inexperienced daughter of privilege became willing to use her name and skill in a campaign below. Ambience pushed that campaign toward militarization. Noxian forces, Piltovan enforcers, and new technology combined around a plan to break hostile power in Zaun. Foreign intervention rarely arrives without a foreign purpose, and Ambience's help carried ambitions beyond the safety of either city. The use of the Grey as a weapon turned Zaun's environment into a tool of control. Pollution created through generations of industry could now be redirected into streets during operations. Piltover could describe the tactic as targeted, but to Zaunites it confirmed an older truth: the upper city was willing to use the undercity's suffering when useful. Chem-barons responded according to their interests. Silco's death had left a vacuum, and no single leader possessed his combination of resources, loyalty, and national vision. Some sought accommodation. Others defended territory. Sevica, who had served the cause of Zaun through shifting leadership, represented the persistence of that cause, even when its leaders failed. Jinx became a symbol larger than her intentions. To Piltover, she embodied terror from below. To many Zaunites, she embodied defiance, particularly after years in which their resistance had been dismissed. Symbols can unite people who disagree about almost everything else, because each supporter is free to place a different hope inside them. That made Jinx powerful and trapped. Every action could be interpreted as belonging to a movement, a sister, a lost father, or a city. The person disappeared behind what others needed her to represent. Vi accepted a place among enforcers during the search for Jinx. Her choice did not erase her Zaunite identity. It showed how divided identities can force impossible roles. She could try to prevent a broader invasion by joining a smaller operation, yet the uniform still tied her to an institution that had harmed her family. Caitlyn's campaign achieved tactical results, but deepened political damage. Removing specific barons or facilities could disrupt Shimmer networks. It could not make Zaun trust Piltover. The more control was imposed from above, the more resistance gained meaning below. Ambience benefited from that cycle. A frightened Piltover needed military support, and a divided Zaun created reasons to extend emergency power. Her influence grew as ordinary politics weakened. This is a familiar pattern in Runeterra. A crisis creates temporary authority. Then, the people holding that authority discover reasons the crisis cannot yet end. Victor moved through a transformation of his own. Contact with the Hex Core and the Arcane altered what his body and mind could do, while his desire to remove suffering expanded beyond individual treatment. People harmed by Shimmer, illness and violence gathered around the healing he seemed able to offer. His community promised an end to pain and division. In a city where bodies had been damaged by labor, pollution and conflict, that promise carried enormous force. Piltover offered progress through products. Chem-barons offered survival through dependence. Victor appeared to offer direct release from the conditions both systems had created. The danger lay in unity without individuality. A solution capable of ending pain by dissolving the boundaries between people could also end choice, difference, and the private self. Victor's compassion moved toward control because he came to see human conflict as a flaw that could be engineered away. Jace confronted the consequences of their shared work. Their relationship had passed through friendship, rivalry, guilt, and opposing visions of progress. At the center remained the issue they had faced as young inventors, because the existence of tools did not mean every solvable limit should be solved. Echo's experiments with the arcane produced another possibility. Rather than using magical science to perfect humanity, he learned to manipulate brief movements in time. His work did not erase every loss or replace reality with an ideal version. It created narrow chances to act differently. That distinction matters. Victor sought a final answer to suffering. Echo worked with second chances that remained limited, local, and human. One vision aimed to remove uncertainty, the other accepted uncertainty while trying to make better choices inside it. Heimerdinger supported Echo's work, bringing ancient knowledge into partnership with Zaunite invention. Their cooperation corrected something missing from Piltover's academy. Experience no longer stood above youth and told it to wait. It stood beside youth and helped it build. The arcane anomaly expanding around the hex gates threatened both cities. Technology created to connect the world had become a point of instability. Trade, politics, and magic converged in the same structure, proving that Piltover's greatest strength could become its greatest vulnerability. Ambience sought power within this instability, while another force moved behind events through deception and magic. Mel's own abilities emerged as she confronted the hidden legacy of her family and the organization that had manipulated it. Her story widened the conflict beyond Piltover and Zaun, showing that the twin cities were now important enough to attract powers from across Runeterra. That importance was the final result of centuries of progress. The Sun Gates made the region valuable. Hextech made it indispensable. The same achievements that protected Piltover through wealth also ensured that foreign powers would never ignore it. When Noxian influence turned into open domination, Piltover and Zaun faced a shared threat. This did not erase their history, Zaunites did not suddenly forget enforcer raids, and Piltovans did not forget Jinx's attacks. Cooperation came from necessity, personal relationships, and the recognition that neither city could survive the crisis alone. Sevica entered the council space as Zaun gained a form of representation that had long been denied. The image mattered, but a seat alone could not repair generations of exploitation. Representation can begin change. It cannot substitute for clean air, equal law, secure housing, and control over local industry. The final struggle around Victor, Ambessa, and the Hex Gates resolved immediate threats while leaving deeper questions open. Jace and Victor's bond became central to stopping the future their discovery had made possible. Mel opposed her mother's campaign and emerged as a power in her own right. Caitlin stepped back from the harshest path grief had pushed her toward. Vi continued to carry both cities within her life. Jinx's fate became uncertain, and uncertainty is the most accurate place to leave it. Her influence remained visible even when her location did not. Zaun had adopted the meaning of her defiance, while Vi retained reason to hope that her sister's story had not ended. The conflict also transformed Heimerdinger and Echo. Their work showed that invention could preserve community rather than elevate one ruler or erase difference. Even after loss, Echo returned to a Zaun that needed builders more than legends. By the end of this age, Piltover and Zaun were politically closer to separation and cooperation at the same time. Zaun's identity had become impossible to dismiss, and its representatives could no longer be treated merely as subjects of Piltovan policy. Yet both cities remained tied through infrastructure, families, trade, and the arcane damage created between them. No clean independence document could separate their air, water, elevators, gates, and economies overnight. A worker might live below and repair machinery above. A Piltovan business might depend upon a Zaunite supplier. The council could redraw authority, but geography would keep demanding cooperation. The age of Arcane changed the meaning of progress. Earlier Piltover had treated invention as proof of moral advancement. New machines were brighter, faster, and more powerful, so the city assumed it was becoming better. The crisis revealed that technical progress and human progress are different achievements. A gate can move a ship without deciding who receives the profit. A weapon can end one battle without creating peace. A device can remove pain while also removing freedom. Science answers what can be done. Politics and ethics decide who is protected, who pays, and whether the result deserves to continue. Zaun reached a similar reckoning with revolution. Resistance can expose injustice without automatically producing justice. A movement can speak for freedom while concentrating power. A symbol can inspire unity while hiding disagreement. Independence matters, but the kind of society built after independence matters just as much. These lessons did not belong only to councillors and champions. Ordinary people had already learned them through daily life. Zaunite families knew that a cheap filter could matter more than a speech. Piltovan traders knew that stable rules could matter more than a brilliant prototype. Communities judge progress by whether tomorrow becomes safer, not by how impressive a machine looks during its unveiling. To understand the full history, I now need to step away from the main political timeline and look at the people, organizations, and inventions that reveal different sides of the twin cities. Their stories overlap, but each one shows how a person can change when raised in a place where progress and inequality grow together. Caitlin's older record describes her rise toward becoming Piltover's finest peacekeeper. Even where details of that biography await adjustment to the shared arcane history, its central purpose remains consistent. She investigates the corruption her class prefers not to notice, and she believes law should serve truth rather than protect appearances. Her family background gives her unusual freedom to challenge authority. An officer without the Kiraman name might lose a career after accusing a powerful house. Caitlin can survive that pressure, which creates responsibility alongside privilege. She can enter rooms closed to most Zaunites and force their evidence into conversations the council would rather avoid. Her relationship with Vi makes that responsibility personal. Vi refuses to let Piltover remain an abstraction of marble and uniforms, while Caitlin refuses to let every Piltovan become identical to the institution that harmed Vi. Their partnership works when each tells the other what her home looks like from outside. Vi's gauntlets turn industrial technology into personal force, but her real importance comes from where she stands. She is a Zaunite serving within Piltover's law, a sister tied to the city's most famous outlaw, and a survivor who knows that legal order can be unjust, while chaos can also destroy innocent lives. An easy version of Vi would ask her to choose one city. Her history refuses that simplicity. She belongs to Zaun without accepting every Zaunite leader, and she can work beside enforcers without forgetting what enforcers did. The tension is not a flaw in her character, it is the political reality of the Twin Cities carried by one person. Jinx embodies invention without institutional restraint. She understands mechanisms intuitively, combining speed, spectacle, and destructive force into devices that ignore the polished rules of Piltovan engineering. Her work proves that genius exists below the academy, which makes her both a security threat and an uncomfortable answer to Piltover's pride. Her public meaning changes according to the observer. Enforcers see crimes, some Zaunites see resistance, families caught between them see danger that no symbol can excuse. That disagreement prevents her from becoming a simple hero or villain in the history of the region. Echo represents another use of the same Zaunite talent. He builds to protect time, people, and possibility. His devices may be extraordinary, but his greatest creation is social. A community that offers young Zaunites an identity beyond gangs, factories, and dependence. The contrast between Echo and Jinx is not intelligence against madness or goodness against evil. Both were gifted children formed by the same failures. Their paths show how belonging changes invention. One found a community that asked him to preserve life. The other found a cause that rewarded weapons. Heimerdinger stands between eras. As a Yordle, his lifespan allows him to remember dangers that humans compress into textbooks. He helped shape Piltover's scientific culture and became its longest-serving council presence, carrying genuine devotion to knowledge along with a habit of distance. His eventual work beside Echo gives his history a needed correction. The old professor does not abandon caution. He learns to connect caution with urgency. Knowledge becomes more useful when it listens to the people living inside the problem. Jace becomes the public image of Piltovan invention. That image exaggerates his independence, because no inventor works alone. Victor's insight, Mel's patronage, family resources, unnamed craftspeople, and Zaunite labor all stand behind what Piltover presents as one man's achievement. This does not erase Jace's talent. It places talent in history. Great inventors often become symbols because a city needs a face for complicated systems. Piltover could celebrate Jace more easily than it could explain how much hextech depended upon a partner from below. Victor's title as the herald of a glorious evolution grows from a compassionate and dangerous idea. Human bodies fail, pollution damages lungs, and accidents take limbs. Hunger and illness reduce human potential. If machinery can correct those limits, refusing to use it can look cruel. The problem appears when correction becomes perfection, and perfection receives one definition. A mechanical limb chosen by an injured worker can expand freedom. A transformation imposed upon everyone removes it. Victor's journey crosses that boundary as his desire to end suffering becomes a desire to end the differences that allow suffering and choice to exist together. Older Zaunite tradition includes the Church of the Glorious Evolved, whose members honor mechanical augmentation as more than practical medicine. They see replacement of flesh as a path toward a stronger future and often welcome people without caring whether they came from Piltover or Zaun. That refusal of class boundaries gives the movement a generous side, even as devotion to evolution can become absolute. Blitzcrank belongs to the history of augmentation in another way. The great steam golem began as machinery designed to help with dangerous waste, then developed a mind and purpose that exceeded ordinary equipment. Older accounts connect Blitzcrank closely with Victor, though the exact details may change as Victor's shared history is updated. What remains valuable is the idea of a machine becoming a citizen of Zaun through service. Blitzcrank moves through places where toxic danger threatens humans and uses immense strength to protect them. In a city where workers are often treated like replaceable parts, the machine behaves with more concern than many owners. Oriana offers a quieter reflection on the boundary between body and mechanism. Her story has existed in more than one form across League's history, and the Arcane era places the name within a family shaped by Singed's work and his refusal to accept loss. The full connection between every earlier account and the current one remains unsettled. That uncertainty should not hide the theme. Piltover and Zaun repeatedly ask whether identity survives bodily transformation. The answer in Oriana's story is not determined by how much metal replaces flesh. Memory, choice, affection, and continuity matter more than material. Camille Ferros represents augmentation used to preserve elite power. Her older biography describes a woman whose hextech heart and bladed body allow her to serve as Clan Ferros's hidden enforcer across an unusually long life. She protects the interests of her house with precision and treats personal attachment as a vulnerability. Camille's history carries several details connected to older hextech chronology, so those details cannot all be placed confidently beside Arcane without revision. Her social role still fits Piltover perfectly. Merchant clans maintain respectable public faces while employing private force to keep trade and secrets under control. Clan Ferros also illustrates the relationship between wealth and technological truth. A powerful house can know more about the source, danger, or scarcity of a resource than the public does, then shape the official story to protect its market. Piltover celebrates open discovery, while many of its fortunes depend upon controlled information. Seraphine approaches the divide through sound and empathy. Born in Piltover to Zaunite parents, she belongs to both cultures and initially experiences the crowded emotions around her as an overwhelming chorus. Technology helps her understand and direct that sensitivity until she can perform for large audiences. Her dream of bringing the cities together through music can appear naive beside councils and chem-barons. Yet culture often creates forms of belonging before politics catches up. A song heard above and below can give two groups one memory, even when it does not solve the material reasons they remain divided. Seraphine's history also touches upon older ideas surrounding hextech crystals and voices within them. Riot's revision of Skarna and the Bracken changed important parts of that lore, which means claims once treated as settled can no longer be repeated without qualification. What survives most clearly is Seraphine's unusual ability to hear layers of feeling that others miss. That change in Bracken lore deserves a pause. Older Piltover stories connected rare hextech crystals directly to the bodies and memories of the Bracken, making the city's technology dependent upon an exploited species. Skarna's newer history relocates and redefines the Bracken, while Arcane presents a different route for hextech's development. Because of that revision, the older crystal explanation cannot be treated as a clean current fact. It remains part of the publishing history of Piltover, and its themes of hidden exploitation still match the city, but a complete modern account must not present retired details as certain. This is one reason lore historians should separate the history inside Runeterra from the history of how Runeterra has been written. Piltover and Zaun have existed through multiple versions since League's early years. Names, relationships, and visual ideas survived while their explanations changed. The Shared Canon project attempts to bring those versions together, but it is ongoing. A biography published before Arcane may preserve a champion's personality while contradicting a newer origin. A card may show a place that still exists, even if its exact political moment is unclear. Responsible retelling uses what still fits and identifies what does not. Ezreal reveals Piltover's relationship with exploration. Raised in the upper city, he became an adventurer whose magical gauntlet and talent carried him into ruins across Runeterra. His fame combines scholarship, treasure hunting, performance, and a tendency to make his own legend sound larger. Piltover rewards that image because exploration brings knowledge and objects back to its markets. The city can describe foreign ruins as discoveries, even when local peoples already understand them. Ezreal's charm does not remove that colonial edge. It shows how easily curiosity and possession become mixed. Professor Von Yip and other eccentric inventors add humor to the scientific culture, but they also demonstrate how experimentation escapes its intended boundaries. Piltover and Zaun are filled with devices whose consequences become stranger than their creators expected. A city that rewards novelty will produce marvels, accidents, and creatures that do not fit official categories. Zac is one of the clearest examples. Formed from toxic material in Zaun's environment and raised through the care of people who saw a living being rather than a specimen. Zac developed empathy alongside extraordinary physical properties. His existence turns industrial waste into a person, without excusing the pollution that created him. He protects ordinary Zaunites partly because he can sense emotional distress. Where chem-barons use fear for control, and Piltover treats it as a security signal, Zac experiences it as a call to help. His story gives the city a guardian created from its damage. Dr. Mundo represents Zaun's dark relationship with medical authority and identity. His present biography places him as a patient transformed within an institution that failed to protect those inside it, after which he adopted the role of a doctor through a deeply distorted understanding. The details are disturbing without needing to be described graphically. A place meant to provide treatment became a place of abuse, and a vulnerable person emerged with power, but without a stable understanding of what had happened. Zaun's lack of accountable institutions allowed the danger to continue. Mundo is sometimes treated as absurd because his speech and behavior are chaotic. Underneath that surface lies a serious piece of Zaun's history. When care becomes unregulated power, the title doctor can be claimed by someone with no ability to recognize harm. Warwick's story is another unsettled bridge between older biography and Arcane. He is a transformed hunter moving through Zaun, shaped by Singed's experiments and drawn toward violence by altered senses and buried memory. Arcane strongly connects that transformation with Vander, though the final form of every detail remains deliberately incomplete. The connection changes how Zaun remembers its former protector. Vander tried to become a shield against escalation. Then the machinery of conflict turned his body into something that could be used within it. Even after transformation, traces of attachment and memory complicate the idea that a person can be entirely replaced. Singed stands behind several of these histories. His work affects Shimmer, bodily transformation, warfare beyond the Twin Cities, and the changing lives of people who become subjects of his experiments. He represents knowledge without a shared moral boundary. Piltover can call him a Zaunite monster, but he began within its intellectual world. The city benefits from celebrating successful science and exporting failed or unacceptable science below. Singed exposes that convenient division. Zaun did not invent his intelligence, it gave his methods room to continue. His motives include personal attachment as well as detached curiosity. That combination makes him more unsettling, not less. A person may care deeply for one life, while treating many others as material. Love directed narrowly does not become a general ethic. Renata Glask offers a different model of chem-baron power. Her family worked as alchemists whose products helped people in Zaun, and their generosity earned trust. Conflict with a powerful Piltover house destroyed that earlier life, after which Renata rebuilt influence through business, products, and calculated public loyalty. She does not present herself merely as a gang leader. She builds a brand. Assistance, employment, medicine, and consumer goods turn gratitude into dependence. Zaunites can feel that Renata has invested in them when Piltover did not, and that feeling gives her authority no raid could create. Her ambition extends upward. Piltover sees chem-barons as problems contained below. But Renata understands that markets cross every border. A product used by both cities can carry influence into homes, factories, and institutions. She turns the language of benevolence into a strategy for ownership. Karina Varaza, another powerful figure associated with Zaunite intrigue, shows how botany, chemistry, espionage, and commerce overlap. Her cultivated image hides networks of information and ambition. In the Twin Cities, beauty often functions as camouflage for industry. Urgot came to Zaun from Noxus and transformed imprisonment into a brutal philosophy of strength. He rejected both Piltover order and chem-baron hierarchy, testing followers through suffering and attempting to tear down systems he considered false. His movement attracts people who feel betrayed by every existing authority. That anger is real, but Urgot directs it toward domination by another name. He claims to remove weakness while creating a world ruled by his definition of strength. Ziri represents the neighborhoods that neither barons nor councillors fully own. Born into a working Zaunite family, she uses her unusual electrical abilities and technical equipment to defend people around her. Her power responds to emotion and connection, making community part of what allows her to act. Unlike leaders who speak for all Zaun, Ziri begins locally. She protects a street, a family, or a group of workers from immediate exploitation. That scale is easy to overlook, yet cities are repaired through thousands of local acts long before one grand settlement changes a map. The same is true of many unnamed Zaunite inventors. Their tools circulate without plaques, and their improvements are copied before anyone records a patent. Piltover's history preserves famous creators. Zaun's history often preserves devices whose creators disappeared into the crowd. Those different systems of memory reinforce class. When Piltover uses an invention, it can turn the inventor into a public figure. When Zaun uses one, the design may be dismantled, rebuilt, and altered until authorship becomes impossible to trace. One city creates monuments, the other creates survival. The economy of the Twin Cities explains why every attempt at separation becomes complicated. Piltover controls symbols of wealth, the gates, great houses, banks, academies, contracts, and formal trade. Zaun controls less visible foundations, industrial labor, chemical production, repairs, salvage, and a market willing to attempt work that established Piltovan firms will not. A merchant ship approaching the region enters a system built through centuries. Its owner may pay for passage, storage, inspection, unloading, insurance, transport, and brokerage. Cargo can be divided among buyers before it reaches a warehouse, and information about that cargo may travel ahead to speculators, deciding what its arrival will do to prices. Piltover's best advantage is not one product. It is connection. A trader from Bilgewater, a Noxian official, a Shuraman caravan master, and an Ionian merchant can all find intermediaries who understand local rules. The city translates distance into fees and influence. This creates a service economy around the visible marvels. Clerks copy agreements. Accountants track shares in expeditions. Lawyers define responsibility when cargo is damaged. Artisans produce luxury goods for newly wealthy families. Teachers prepare children to enter academies or family firms. Zaun participates in every stage without receiving equal recognition. Dockworkers move cargo, mechanics keep lifts and pumps working, chemical plants provide reagents for manufacturing. Couriers carry information through routes too narrow or unofficial for formal systems. Smuggling emerges wherever official trade creates prices high enough to reward avoidance. Piltover's regulations and tariffs give smugglers something to bypass, while Zaun's maze of passages gives them space to do it. The illegal market is not separate from the legal one. Goods often pass between the two several times before a final buyer asks where they came from. The same applies to invention. A Piltover laboratory may require a rare chemical available only through a Zaunite supplier. That supplier may obtain it from a baron whose factory uses stolen equipment manufactured above. The finished device can return to Piltover with every trace of its lower city origin removed. Patents and academic credit protect the people who can access the institutions that issue them. Zaunite inventors often lack that access, leaving their designs vulnerable to appropriation. A merchant can purchase a prototype cheaply, refine its appearance, and present it to investors who would never descend to meet the original builder. This theft does not always require a secret conspiracy. Systems can transfer credit through ordinary procedure. If an inventor cannot file papers, hire representation, produce standardized diagrams, or demonstrate a device in an approved hall, the city concludes that the person who did those things must be the creator. Piltover's houses turn accumulated advantage into inherited advantage. A child born into a leading clan receives education, introductions, a safe workspace, and time to fail. A child in the sump may possess equal talent, but must build after working, protect every usable part, and hope an accident does not remove the family's income. That difference shapes what each city calls genius. Piltover often recognizes the person who transforms an idea into a public institution. Zaun recognizes the person who keeps a machine alive with no correct replacement parts. Both require intelligence, but only one usually receives a statue. The council sits at the center of Piltover's formal power. Its members represent major interests and guide policy for a city whose government has long overlapped with mercantile wealth. Decisions about security, technology, trade, and Zaun can rarely be separated, because the same families hold stakes in all four. This structure can act quickly when elite interests align. If the gates are threatened, powerful houses share a reason to cooperate. If reform would distribute costs toward those same houses, debate becomes slower and more complicated. The council's weakness is not simply corruption in the narrow sense of secret payments. Its deeper problem is perspective. Members surrounded by people who profit from the system can sincerely believe that prosperity proves the system is fair. Piltover's streets support that belief. Visitors see clean districts, public art, efficient transport, and impressive institutions. Wealth produced through unequal arrangements returns as visible order, while many costs remain below the cliffs. Zaun's politics are more fragmented. Chem-barons control businesses, crews, and territories without sharing one constitution. Community leaders hold moral authority without formal resources. Gangs enforce local rules. Families, workshops, and mutual aid groups fill gaps left by every larger power. Fragmentation protects Zaun from one simple form of control, because no leader can command all of it easily. It also makes long-term planning difficult. Clean air systems, water networks, structural repairs, and public health require cooperation across districts. Yet every provider fears strengthening a rival. Silco came closer than most to creating centralized political direction. His control over Shimmer and his national language allowed different groups to align behind one goal. The system remained dependent upon him, which meant his death exposed how little durable government had been built beneath personal authority. Savika's later presence in political leadership suggests a move from revolutionary enforcement toward representation. Her experience gives Zaun a voice familiar with the cost of both Piltover domination and Zaunite power struggles. The challenge is turning one voice into institutions accountable to people who never chose a baron. A stable Zaun would need more than recognition. It would need rules for factories, protection from private armies, public services, and a method of resolving disputes without relying upon wealth or fear. Creating those systems while resisting Piltover control is the difficult work that begins after the dramatic conflict ends. Piltover faces reform of its own. Allowing a Zaunite place in government changes who can speak, but the council's economic structure may still reward the same houses. Real power depends upon budgets, records, enforcement, and the ability to stop a profitable policy, not simply the right to object. The enforcers stand where these political systems meet daily life. Their work includes genuine protection from crime, and many officers may believe they serve the public. Institutional purpose, however, is revealed by patterns rather than individual intentions. If officers respond faster to damaged Piltover property than to endangered Zaunite workers, the institution teaches both communities whose safety counts. If an undercity suspect can disappear into detention while a wealthy suspect calls upon family counsel, unequal procedure becomes a form of political education. Marcus showed how personal compromise can corrupt command. Pressure, fear, and private arrangements allowed Silco to influence enforcement from below, while the council remained unaware. His case demonstrates that repression does not create reliable control. An officer given unaccountable power becomes easier to compromise, not harder. Grayson represented a more practical tradition. She understood that order depended upon relationships and restraint. Her agreement with Vander did not create justice, but it reduced the chance that every incident would become a citywide confrontation. Caitlin's long-term importance may lie in rebuilding that institution around investigation and accountability. Her experience on both sides of the river gives her knowledge previous commanders lacked. Whether knowledge becomes reform depends upon rules that survive after one good leader leaves. Vi's presence can help officers understand Zaun, yet it can also be used as proof that the institution has changed when deeper patterns remain. One Zaunite uniform does not correct unequal detention, inherited suspicion, or military tactics. Representation matters most when it changes practice. Education offers another view of inequality. Piltover's academy gathers scholars, laboratories, and patrons in a setting designed to turn knowledge into civic prestige. Students can study established theory, use rare equipment, and meet the families who finance future careers. Heimerdinger's role gave that institution continuity. His standards protected it from reckless claims, while his distance from human urgency sometimes made the academy slow to recognize needs outside its walls. Institutions inherit both the wisdom and the blind spots of their longest-serving figures. Zaun teaches through apprenticeships, workshops, and necessity. A young mechanic learns by watching a pump fail, taking it apart, and discovering which pieces can be replaced with something never intended for that purpose. Failure gives immediate instruction because a non-working machine may cut off water or ventilation. These methods produce different habits. Piltover training values repeatability and formal explanation. Zaunite training values adaptability and local knowledge. The greatest inventions often appear when the habits meet, as they did through Jace and Victor, or Heimerdinger and Echo. The cities could build a stronger future by creating routes between those systems. Scholarships alone would not be enough if Zaunite students were expected to abandon their communities and accept Piltover definitions of expertise. Exchange would need to recognize knowledge flowing upward as equal knowledge. Medicine follows the same divide. Piltover can support refined instruments, trained specialists, and research protected from industrial contamination. Zaun has urgent need, inventive practitioners, and access to chemicals whose risks may be poorly regulated. Shimmer shows how medicine and exploitation can share a bottle. A substance capable of supporting healing can also be sold to dependent users, forced upon workers, or adapted for combat. The moral category does not lie inside the liquid. It lies in dosage, consent, purpose, and control. Mechanical augmentation can restore movement, protect lungs, or replace organs damaged by work. It can also bind a person to the company that services the device. If survival requires a proprietary chemical or part, the owner of that supply owns more than a market. Zaunite clinics may operate with limited tools while treating conditions Piltover rarely sees. Their practitioners develop knowledge that upper city medicine needs, even if official associations dismiss them. Once again, the lower city provides expertise without receiving equal authority. Singed represents the far edge of unregulated research, but placing every Zaunite scientist beside him would repeat Piltover's prejudice. Most inventors below are not seeking subjects for dangerous experiments. They are solving immediate problems with whatever resources exist. Public health depends upon infrastructure more than heroic cures. Clean air, safe water, reliable waste systems, and workplace protections prevent more suffering than one celebrated treatment. Those solutions attract less glamour because no single inventor can claim all the credit. The grey makes air political. Piltover's height and airflow protect many upper districts, allowing residents to treat pollution as a Zaunite condition. Yet the haze comes from an interconnected industrial economy whose profits move upward. Yana's presence offers moments of relief, but faith cannot replace environmental policy. Asking a spirit to clear air while factories continue producing unchecked waste turns miracle into maintenance. Zaun deserves systems that do not require divine rescue. Water carries similar risks. The fissures, river, old flooded districts, and industrial runoff create a complex environment below. Pumps and treatment devices are part of daily survival, and whoever controls them gains quiet power. This is why a complete history cannot focus only on battles. A damaged pump may affect a district longer than a council speech. A repaired ventilation line can change more lives than a ceremonial declaration. Housing follows the vertical economy. Safer levels cost more. Rooms closer to industrial sites may be cheaper, but expose residents to greater noise and contamination. Buildings grow through additions, repairs, and unofficial structures because space is limited and regulation uneven. Piltover can point to unsafe construction as evidence of Zaunite disorder. That judgment ignores the flow of investment. People build with scrap when safe materials remain unaffordable, and they crowd unstable areas when land above is protected for people with stronger claims. The architecture still contains beauty. Colored glass catches chemical light. Bridges and balconies create layered views impossible in a flat city. Workshops display moving signs assembled from gears, tubes, and repurposed machinery. Zaun's aesthetic is not pollution made attractive. It is human creativity refusing to disappear inside pollution. Residents decorate masks, personalize mechanical limbs, paint walls, and turn industrial materials into fashion, because survival without culture is not enough. Piltover also uses beauty politically. Gold trim, clean stone, and balanced design make authority appear natural. A council chamber built high above the city tells visitors that decisions belong at the top before anyone speaks. Progress Day displays that confidence. Inventions, decorations, and public events present history as a steady rise from difficulty toward achievement. The holiday invites people to admire the gates without dwelling upon the collapse beneath them. Zaunite remembrance interrupts that story. Memory of the disaster insists that progress has casualties and that celebration without acknowledgement becomes insult. The disagreement resembles the cities themselves. One looks forward to justify power, while the other looks backward to demand accountability. A shared commemoration could change their relationship. Piltover would need to recognize the people lost and the wealth extracted afterward. Zaun would not need to stop valuing invention. It would gain the right to define which inventions deserve celebration. Religion in the region survives beneath a culture that praises science. Janna's followers prove that technological societies do not leave faith behind. They turn toward it when technology fails to provide safety, meaning, or control. Her bluebird symbol connects the modern undercity to sailors from Zaun. A small medallion can carry more historical continuity than a grand Piltovan monument, because it preserves a memory from before the split. Other forms of belief arise around machinery. The glorious evolved treat transformation as a path beyond weakness. Their faith uses the language of progress but gives it spiritual purpose, promising that human limitation can be overcome through deliberate change. Piltover has its own secular faith. It trusts institutions, measurement, invention, and the claim that tomorrow should be better because people can build it. That belief produces real achievements, but it becomes dangerous when the city assumes every achievement proves its goodness. Zaunite culture trusts adaptability. Plans fail, parts break, leaders disappear, and official help rarely arrives on time. The person who can improvise becomes valuable, and humor survives as a way to deny hardship complete control over the mind. Music carries those identities across levels. Zaunite rhythms can grow from industrial sound, crowded clubs, street performance, and instruments rebuilt from available materials. Piltovan music may appear in formal halls supported by patrons, notation, and trained ensembles. Neither remains pure. Performers borrow sounds, audiences travel, and fashionable rebellion allows Piltovans to consume styles created below. The upper city can enjoy Zaunite culture more easily than it accepts Zaunite political demands. Seraphine's career sits inside that tension. A performer claiming to unite the cities can create genuine shared emotion while benefiting from a Piltovan industry. Whether her work changes material conditions depends upon what she does with attention after the music ends. Language marks class through accent and vocabulary. Technical terms from the Academy signal education. Workshop slang signals experience with machines. A person moving between cities may adjust speech to avoid being underestimated or targeted. Names for the cities carry judgment as well. Calling Zaun the undercity can describe geography while implying subordination. Calling Piltover topside can describe height while reducing its grand identity to where it sits in relation to someone below. Pilty and similar terms compress long resentment into one word. They can be playful among friends or hostile at a checkpoint. Meaning depends upon who speaks, who listens, and which uniform stands nearby. Food follows trade and scarcity. Piltover's markets receive ingredients from distant regions because the gates bring the world to its docks. Wealthy households can turn imported rarity into status, serving dishes whose value comes partly from how far they travelled. Zaunite cooking rewards preservation, strong flavour, affordability, and ingredients that can be grown or traded within limited spaces. Markets below also receive foreign goods through formal and informal routes, creating combinations no Piltovan chef planned. Communal eating places matter because private homes may be small. A tavern or stall becomes a centre for news, work offers, and local reputation. The last drop gained authority partly because people already gathered there. Children experience the cities differently. A Piltovan child may learn basic engineering through safe toys and supervised lessons. A Zaunite child may understand real machinery early because household survival requires helping with repairs. Danger creates competence while stealing freedom. Praising Zaunite children for toughness can hide the fact that they deserved protection. Vi, Powder, Echo and their friends became capable because adults and institutions had failed them. Piltover often imagines Zaunite youth as potential criminals. That assumption narrows opportunity. Then treats the resulting survival strategies as proof the assumption was correct. A fair system would ask what talent appeared before punishment shaped it. Family extends beyond blood in both cities, though necessity makes that visible in Zaun. Vanda's household, the firelights, workshop crews, and neighborhood networks create kinship through care. When conflict removes parents or separates siblings, chosen family keeps children alive. Great houses practice another form of family politics. Marriage, inheritance, mentorship, and reputation connect personal choices to commercial strategy. A child may inherit not only wealth but obligations to preserve alliances built before birth. Mel's relationship with Ambessa reveals the pressure inside elite lineage. Family offers resources and protection while demanding loyalty to a vision of power. Refusing that vision can feel like rejecting both heritage and safety. The Kiraman household shows a softer version of the same tension. Caitlin receives genuine love, but love can become protection so complete that it restricts choice. Privilege does not eliminate family conflict, it changes the consequences of that conflict. Foreign relations place every local dispute within a larger world. Noxus sees strategic routes and useful technology. Shurima connects to the region through geography and ancient history. Bilgewater benefits from easier sea trade through the gates. Ionia sends merchants, ideas, and travelers, while carrying its own complicated relationship with technology and foreign power. Demacia may distrust uncontrolled magic, even as it requires trade. Each nation approaches Piltover with admiration, caution, or appetite. Diplomacy becomes business. A trade agreement can produce political alignment without a formal alliance. A contract granting access to hex gates can matter more than a public promise because it changes what a foreign ruler stands to lose. Piltover prefers to describe itself as neutral, focused on commerce rather than conquest. Neutrality helps a trade hub welcome rivals through the same gates. It also allows the city to profit from conflicts it claims to stand outside. Weapons complicate that position. Once hextech can strengthen armies, selling or withholding it becomes a political act. A city cannot remain outside war while deciding which side receives a decisive tool. Ambessa's intervention made this truth immediate. Noxian power did not need to annex Piltover to influence it. Fear, advisors, and military support could redirect policy while leaving local symbols in place. Mel's response created another model. A person shaped by Noxus could oppose Noxian domination without denying her origin. Identity did not dictate allegiance, just as Vi's Zaunite origin did not prevent her from working with Caitlin. The Black Rose's interest demonstrated that visible armies are not the only foreign threat. Information, magical secrets, and personal pressure can move through elite networks unnoticed. Piltover's belief in rational transparency leaves it vulnerable to powers that operate through hidden traditions. Zaun receives foreign influence differently. Smugglers bring weapons and materials. Refugees and workers bring skills. Noxian figures such as Urgot can transform local movements, while outside merchants strengthen whichever baron offers access. Independence requires the ability to manage those relationships. A Zaun free from Piltover could still become dependent upon Noxian arms, foreign credit, or a private supplier. Sovereignty is not only the absence of an upper city officer. Technology remains the region's greatest export and greatest uncertainty. Hextech proves that magic can be structured into tools, but every structure rests upon assumptions about the arcane that may fail. Chemtech proves that extraordinary results can come from accessible materials, but accessibility without standards spreads risk. Neither system is morally pure. Hextech weapons remain weapons even when polished. Chemtech medicine remains medicine even when created below. The name tells us where a technology sits socially, not whether every use is good. Future cooperation could combine their strengths. Piltovan precision and Zaunite adaptability could produce cleaner industrial systems, safer augmentations, and infrastructure designed for the actual conditions below. That partnership would need equal ownership, or it would become another extraction of Zaunite knowledge. Echo and Heimerdinger offer a small example. Their work succeeds because the older scholar does not simply take a Zaunite idea back to the academy. He enters Echo's community and contributes within its purpose. Jace and Victor offer the warning. Their partnership begins across class, but public recognition and political authority separate them. A future partnership needs structures that prevent one city from owning what both create. The Hexgates changed movement, yet their damage also exposed dependency. If global trade relies upon one magical system, instability in Piltover becomes instability everywhere connected to it. The city gains influence and responsibility together. Rebuilding after the arcane crisis would involve foreign pressure. Merchants want routes restored, governments want assurances, investors want losses contained. Those demands may push leaders to repair the old system quickly instead of asking whether it should return unchanged. Zaun can use that moment to negotiate. Piltover needs stability below if gates, docks, and supply lines are to function. The bargaining power Silco sought through Shimmer may emerge more sustainably through labor, representation, and control of essential infrastructure. Collective action among workers could matter as much as council reform. If dockhands, mechanics, and transport crews act together, they can interrupt wealth without attacking civilians. Piltover's economy depends upon people it has historically excluded from power. Chem-barons will resist systems that reduce private control. Some may enter politics, turning territory into votes or public contracts. Others may sabotage reform that threatens profitable scarcity. Piltover's houses will adapt as well. A family can support cleaner factories when public pressure grows, then ensure its own company receives the contract. Reform must be judged by who gains control, not by the language printed around it. The future of enforcer authority remains especially difficult. Zaun cannot accept permanent policing directed from Piltover. Piltover will not accept open movement of armed groups near the gates. A shared security system would need local accountability and limits strong enough to survive the next crisis. Justice for past abuse raises questions with no easy answer. Records may be incomplete. Commanders may be gone. Families want recognition, while institutions fear liability. Ignoring the past guarantees resentment, but punishment alone cannot rebuild trust. A truth process could begin with the bridge, detentions, use of the grey, industrial contamination, and partnerships between officials and barons. Piltover would need to open archives protected by great houses. Zaunite leaders would need to admit harms committed in the name of liberation. Memory matters because each city has used selective history as a weapon. Piltover remembers invention and forgets extraction. Zaun remembers oppression and can overlook victims of its own bosses. Shared history does not require shared innocence. The ancient disaster offers the clearest starting point. Both cities exist because of it. Acknowledging those lost during the collapse would place human cost at the foundation of every Progress Day celebration. Janna connects that memory to survival rather than vengeance. Her role in saving people belongs to Zaun's spiritual history, but it also belongs to Piltover because the ancestors of both populations emerged from the same old city. Oshra Zaun carries political meaning in the present. It proves that division is not eternal. The people once shared one name, even if recovering that exact society is impossible. Nostalgia cannot solve modern differences. The old port existed under conditions that no longer remain, and thousands of years have created distinct identities. Unity imposed in the name of ancient history could become another denial of Zaun's right to define itself. The useful lesson is narrower. Piltover and Zaun are capable of being different without pretending they are unrelated. Cooperation can respect separation, and shared infrastructure can be managed without one city ruling the other. This requires patience of a different kind from Heimerdinger's old caution. It is not patience that asks the suffering to wait. It is patience that refuses to declare a centuries-old problem solved after one council vote. Clean air systems take years to build. Schools need teachers from the communities they serve. Courts need procedures trusted by people who once feared detention. Industrial reform must continue after attention moves elsewhere. Culture can support that work by changing whose stories are remembered. Piltover could honour Zaunite inventors by name. Zaun could preserve records before workshops and witnesses disappear. Museums could present the Sun Gates as achievement and disaster together. Archives matter because law within the world is also power. A great house controlling documents can control which claim appears legitimate. An oral history dismissed as rumour may preserve what official records deliberately removed. Explorers beneath the cities have found ruins, tunnels, and objects tied to older Zaun. Archaeology could deepen understanding of Oshra Zaun, but excavation in a living city raises questions. Residents should not be displaced, so Piltover can display their past. The flooded and sealed districts may contain evidence of the original collapse. They may also contain chemical hazards, unstable structures, and places families consider graves. Curiosity requires consent. Ezreal's style of exploration celebrates discovery, but the Twin Cities need another approach, research conducted with the people whose history is being uncovered. Knowledge should return to the community rather than becoming one more valuable object carried upward. Maps provide a similar challenge. Zaun changes constantly as routes close, lifts fail, buildings connect, and territory shifts. Official Piltover maps may show infrastructure important to trade, while omitting spaces important to residents. A child who knows the safe way home understands a city that a surveyor does not. Local knowledge deserves to be recorded without giving hostile authorities a guide to vulnerable communities. Time itself feels different across the levels. Piltover measures progress through unveilings, council terms, contracts, and scheduled shipments. Zaun often measures it through shifts, air conditions, medicine supplies, and how long a machine can keep running. Echo's fascination with time grows naturally from that environment. People below lose years to conditions others could have prevented. A few saved seconds can protect a friend, while a delayed repair can change a life. His time technology does not make history easy to correct. Limited control forces careful choice, which may be why his approach remains human. If every outcome could be rewritten without cost, responsibility would disappear. The arcane repeatedly tempts people with final solutions. Jace wants useful power made safe. Victor wants suffering removed. Piltover wants progress without disorder. Zaunite revolutionaries want freedom without the slow compromises of government. History denies all of them a perfect ending. Every solution creates maintenance, trade-offs, and new power. That does not make progress meaningless. It makes responsibility permanent. Piltover's greatest achievement may not be hextech. It may be the ability to gather people, goods, and ideas from across Runeterra in one place. Used well, that connection can spread solutions faster than any isolated city could. Its greatest failure is confusing centrality with superiority. Being the place where roots meet does not make the people controlling those roots wiser than everyone who passes through. Zaun's greatest achievement may not be chemtech. It may be the persistence of community under systems that repeatedly treat people as disposable. Families, firelights, mechanics, healers, and local defenders keep rebuilding after larger powers move on. Its greatest danger is allowing resilience to become an excuse for continued harm. People should not have to prove strength by surviving conditions that could be changed. Together, the cities demonstrate two incomplete truths. Piltover shows that organized investment and knowledge can build wonders. Zaun shows that creativity does not require permission, and that people excluded from institutions remain capable of remaking the world. Either truth without the other becomes destructive. Organization without inclusion protects hierarchy. Freedom without accountable organization leaves space for barons. This is why characters who cross boundaries matter so much. Victor enters Piltover from Zaun. Vi moves from Zaun into enforcement. Caitlin descends from privilege into realities her class hides. Heimerdinger leaves the council and learns beside Echo. Mel brings Noxian political knowledge into Piltover and eventually uses it against domination. Seraphine carries a Zaunite family history into Piltovan culture. Each crossing exposes a story that one side tells about itself. Not every crossing ends well. Singed moves from Piltovan scholarship into unregulated experimentation. Ambessa enters Piltover offering security and tries to make its crisis serve her power. Exchange can spread exploitation as easily as understanding. The difference lies in accountability. People who cross a boundary and listen can change. People who cross only to take reproduce the old division. The next generation will inherit physical reminders of the crisis. Damaged districts, altered political seats, lost relatives, abandoned factories, and arcane scars will remain after speeches fade. Children will ask why those places exist. The answer they receive will shape the next conflict. If Piltover teaches that irrational Zaunite violence nearly destroyed progress, fear will return. If Zaun teaches that every Piltovan is an enemy, cooperation will appear as betrayal. A fuller history can say more. Piltover created prosperity and injustice. Zaun created resistance and new forms of exploitation. People on both sides tried to protect families, and leaders on both sides used those families as justification. No city acted as one mind, because councillors disagreed and barons competed. Enforcers made different choices. Zaunite communities resisted Silco as well as Piltover. History becomes inaccurate whenever a population is reduced to the actions of its most powerful figure. The same care applies to champions. Jinx is not all of Zaun. Jace is not all of Piltover. Their visibility makes them useful symbols, but symbols shrink millions of ordinary decisions into one face. The Sun Gates continue to stand as the best symbol of the whole history. They are an engineering triumph built from catastrophe, a source of shared wealth distributed unequally, and a connection between worlds that divided the people nearest to it. When ships pass through, they repeat the original promise of the canal: distance can be overcome. The political challenge is making sure the people living around that passage are not treated as another obstacle to be removed. Hextech adds a second symbol. It joins magic and machinery, Piltovan ambition and Zaunite insight, practical benefit and uncontrolled risk. The technology is neither miracle nor curse by itself. Chemtech forms the third. It grows from exclusion, offers power to those denied official resources, and exposes users to risks that wealthier people can avoid. It can heal, strengthen, corrupt, or control according to the system around it. The grey is the fourth symbol, though Piltover would rather leave it out. It makes invisible policy visible in the air. Every breath below records decisions about factories, waste, and whose environment counts. Janna's wind answers that image. Clean air moving through Zaun reminds the city of an older identity and a form of protection that does not ask for ownership. Her presence remains quiet because hope in Zaun often survives quietly. The firelight tree carries the same promise through nature rather than spirit. Life can grow inside the undercity when people protect the conditions it needs. Zaun is not doomed by character or geography. The council chamber represents authority above, and Sevika's place within it complicates what that authority can become. A room once struck by the consequences of exclusion may become a room where exclusion is challenged, though only future decisions can prove it. The bridge represents repeated failure and repeated connection. Conflict has turned it into a boundary, while families and workers still need to cross. A bridge cannot choose whether it carries trade, an army, or reconciliation. Those choices belong to people, which brings the history back to its beginning. Oshra Zaun depended upon winds and ships, but its people gave those forces meaning. Modern Piltover and Zaun possess far greater technology, yet they remain dependent upon collective choices no machine can make. The exact dates of much of this history remain uncertain. Runeterra does not provide one complete calendar for every event, and revisions have changed the placement of several discoveries. Claiming precise years where the records do not support them would create false certainty. The broad order is clearer. The ancient port existed within Shurima. It survived the Empire's fall and later magical conflicts. The canal disaster broke the old city, the Sun Gates expanded trade, and Piltover rose above damaged Zaun. Merchant governments strengthened in the upper city, while industry and baronial power grew below. Hextech and Chemtech accelerated both prosperity and tension. The generation of Jace, Victor, Vi, Jinx, Caitlyn, and Echo brought those tensions into open crisis. Arcane power and foreign intervention pushed the cities toward destruction, then forced cooperation. Zaun gained recognition that earlier leaders had pursued, while Piltover lost the illusion that it could remain untouched by the Undercity's conditions. The current status remains unfinished. Zaun possesses a stronger political identity and a place in decisions that once excluded it. Piltover still holds wealth, infrastructure, and global relationships that cannot be redistributed through symbolism alone. Victor and Jace left behind a changed understanding of hextech, but the technology's future remains uncertain. The Hexgate's role, the Arcane's deeper rules, and the fate of several central figures have not all received final answers. Jinx remains a presence even where certainty about her location ends. Vi and Caitlin continue representing a bond across the divide, and Echo continues representing the work of rebuilding from within Zaun rather than waiting for rescue. Heimerdinger's path also remains open to interpretation after his work with time and the arcane. What matters historically is the change already completed. Piltover's elder learned that wisdom must enter the streets it intends to guide. Mel's future points beyond the cities toward Noxus and the magical powers tied to her family. Her departure or continued influence will connect Piltover's recovery to struggles elsewhere in Runeterra. Singed's work has consequences beyond Zaun as well. His knowledge has already crossed borders, proving that the undercity cannot be treated as a sealed laboratory whose dangers remain local. Renata, Urgot, Karina, and other figures preserve instability within Zaun's wider lore. As shared canon continues to align older biographies with newer events, their exact place may become clearer. For now, they show that Silco's end did not remove every rival model of power. Camille and Clan Feros preserve similar uncertainty above. Piltover's great houses will not disappear because the council changes one seat. Private wealth can adapt more quickly than public reform. Any complete history written now must end with that openness. Riot's shared Runeterra is still developing, and future champion updates or stories may revise details that older biographies currently leave unresolved. Accuracy means preserving room for those answers. It also means refusing to use uncertainty as an excuse to ignore what is clear. Zaun's suffering was not a misunderstanding. Piltover benefited from unequal structures. Zaunite leaders also harmed Zaunites. Hextech and chemtech both changed the balance of power. The people who built the cities were never merely victims of history. They made choices under unequal conditions, created communities, invented tools, preserved faith, and carried memory through repeated upheaval. If I reduce Piltover to arrogance, I miss its genuine belief that knowledge can improve life. If I reduce Zaun to suffering, I miss its humor, beauty, invention, and political imagination. The fuller picture allows admiration without innocence. Piltover's gates are extraordinary, and their history includes disaster. Zaun's resilience is extraordinary, and resilience should not be required forever. That balance is the true subject of the twin cities. Every bright discovery casts a shadow somewhere, but the shadow does not cancel the light. It tells us where responsibility must go next. Progress Day can become more honest if celebration includes remembrance. Zaunite independence can become more meaningful if it protects residents from local exploitation. Hextech can become more humane if access and oversight belong to more than merchant houses. Chemtech can become safer if people no longer have to choose between dangerous treatment and no treatment. Enforcers can become peacekeepers only when Zaunites possess equal protection under the rules they enforce. No single champion can achieve all of this. Caitlin cannot reform every officer alone. Echo cannot provide a home for every displaced child. Sevica cannot represent every Zaunite voice. The dependence upon heroes is itself a sign of weak institutions. A fair city should not need one exceptional person to prevent every abuse. It should make ordinary decency easier and concentrated harm harder. Piltover understands systems when building machines. It has been slower to understand society as a system with equally real inputs and consequences. Zaun understands consequences intimately, but has struggled to create institutions larger than personal loyalty. Their future depends upon learning from one another without repeating extraction. Piltover can contribute resources and standards without claiming ownership. Zaun can contribute knowledge and local authority without accepting barons as the only alternative. The river and gates make isolation impossible. Air moves between levels. Trade crosses borders. Families form across class. The arcane itself refuses to remain contained within one laboratory. Geography created opportunity, ambition created disaster, trade created wealth, and inequality turned shared success into division. That sequence has repeated in different forms throughout the history. Jace and Victor repeated it through hextech. Shared discovery created opportunity, ambition accelerated development, politics divided ownership, and uncontrolled power produced crisis. Vander and Silco repeated it through revolution. Shared purpose created hope, conflict exposed different methods, power divided the movement, and personal bonds redirected political decisions. Vi and Jinx repeated it through family. Shared childhood created love, disaster separated them, different protectors shaped their identities, and the cities turned their relationship into public conflict. Caitlin and Vi offered a possible reversal. Division created contact, contact created understanding, understanding challenged institutions, and personal trust opened a path toward political change. Echo and Heimerdinger offered another. Unequal knowledge met inside Zaun. Old caution learned urgency, young invention gained support, and cooperation served a community rather than a council. These patterns give the long history its coherence. The people and technologies change, but the region keeps asking whether connection will become partnership or control. Oshra Zaun once called to the wind for safe passage. Modern Piltover built gates so large that ships pass between seas, while modern Zaun built machines from what those ships and factories left behind. Both achievements come from the same ancient instinct. People want to cross danger and reach one another. The tragedy begins when some people control the crossing and decide that others belong beneath it. The story does not need a perfect reunion to end with hope. Zaun can remain Zaun, proud of an identity formed through centuries below. Piltover can remain Piltover, proud of learning and connection. Hope rests in whether pride can exist without superiority. It rests in whether memory can demand justice without demanding endless revenge. It rests in whether invention can be measured by the lives it improves rather than the power it displays. The people of the Twin Cities have already shown that change is possible. A council once unwilling to speak of Zaunite independence eventually faced a Zaunite representative. A Yordle who advised waiting learned to build beside children who could not wait. An enforcer raised above learned to see the streets below as home to people rather than suspects. A Zaunite fighter who hated the uniform learned that protecting people sometimes required changing what the uniform meant. None of those changes erases loss. History cannot return Vander's old peace, restore the districts beneath the river, or give every invention a harmless beginning. Repair is not the same as reversal. Repair accepts that the past remains and still chooses what happens next. Zaun understands repair better than any city in Runeterra. Its people have spent generations keeping damaged systems alive. Piltover understands design. Its people can plan structures that survive forces an improvised patch cannot. If repair and design finally meet as equals, the cities may build something neither could create alone. That possibility is not guaranteed. Great houses may protect privilege. Barons may capture new institutions. Foreign powers may return. The arcane may reveal dangers beyond current understanding. Uncertainty does not remove responsibility. it makes choices matter more. Every policy, invention, and alliance will add another layer to the history built above Zaun. This is the story of Piltover and Zaun, one ancient port divided by catastrophe, two cultures shaped by unequal recovery, and a modern civilization forced to confront the cost hidden inside its greatest achievements. Piltover rose because it controlled passage, organized wealth, and turned invention into global influence. Zaun endured because its people adapted, protected one another, and created power from what the upper city discarded. The sun gates connected east and west while separating above from below. Hextech promised a better future while repeating old inequalities. Chemtech gave Zaun strength while creating new forms of dependence. Vanda sought peace without freedom. Silco sought freedom through control. Jays sought progress through invention. Victor sought an end to suffering through transformation. Caitlin sought justice inside a flawed institution. Vi sought family across a political divide. Jinx sought an identity no one else could define. Echo sought enough time and space for his community to grow. Their choices brought the cities to the edge of ruin and then into reluctant cooperation. The immediate crisis ended, but the deeper history did not. Piltover still has to learn that progress is not proven by height, wealth, or brighter machines. Zaun still has to learn that resistance becomes freedom only when ordinary people can live without fear of the leaders claiming to protect them. Both cities still breathe the same moving air, depend upon the same crossing, and remember the same disaster in different ways. Their future will be decided by whether they can turn that shared dependence into shared responsibility. For thousands of years, the people of this place have survived empires, magical wars, geological collapse, industrial poison, political violence, and the unstable power of the arcane. Survival is no longer the only goal. The next measure of progress is simpler and harder. It is whether a child in Zaun can grow without being trained by danger, whether an inventor can receive credit without a family name, and whether the air below can become as ordinary and clean as the air above. If those things happen, the greatest achievement of Piltover and Zaun will not be a gate, a crystal, a weapon, or a machine that bends time. It will be a society that finally values the people who made every other achievement possible. Until then, the twin cities remain unfinished, magnificent and wounded, joined and divided, always building something new upon the layers of what came before.